Thank you, Karen, for the nice introduction. My story is called The Next Cut. You see, when I was 19, I had hopes and dreams. When I was 19, I knew everything, but in reality, I didn't know very much. When I was 19, I was fearless, but I was afraid of many things. See, when I was 19, I went to a war halfway across the world in a place called Vietnam. Now, I had seen war in movies, I had read about wars in books, but in reality, I really didn't know what to expect. So my heart was filled with a lot of trepidation. I had some anxiety. Would I get off the plane and would there be bombs falling all around me? I really didn't know. Well, the plane landed in Saigon, which was the capital. It's now called Ho Chi Minh City. And when we got off the plane, a group of us, there were some soldiers waiting to board the plane to head home. And they started jeering and taunting us. Ha ha ha, we're going home, you guys are getting started. You don't know what you're in for. That was very reassuring to me. Now, to be honest, I was a little nervous. So we got into Saigon, and it was a surprise. All I saw was a bustling city. There was traffic congestions, there were trucks and cars and people riding motorized scooters and bicycles, a lot of shops and vendors. The only hint of a war, to me, was that there were soldiers and military vehicles that mingled and kind of blended in with the crowds. Now, from Saigon, we were to travel about 40 miles north to a place called Cu Chi. Now, in Cu Chi, that was the headquarters of the 25th Infantry Division, and I was to serve as a medic with the 25th Infantry Division. Now, I got on the truck with several others, and I'm looking at my orders, and I'm looking at the word Cu Chi, spelled C-U-C-H-I. And I started saying that in my mind, and then I saw that in one of the lines, it had an O at the end. So it was C-U-C-H-I-O, and I started saying that, cuchillo, cuchillo, and that reminded me of the word for knife in Spanish, cuchillo. So I was saying in my mind, cuchillo, cuchillo. Well, sadly, I was to learn that that place did cut like a knife. It could cut your hopes, your dreams, it could cut your possessions, cut your body, and yes, your life. Well, it was a long trip on that truck, and I couldn't help but marvel at the beautiful countryside. There were green fields and rice paddies, beautiful mountains and tall palm trees, and I could see farmers dressed in the traditional pajama-like outfits with those cone-shaped hats working with water buffalo. And that sky, the sky was the bluest sky that I had ever seen, and those perfectly formed cumulus clouds, they could have been painted by any master artist. It was beautiful. It wasn't long until we got into Cuchillo, and I found it was bustling too, not as big as Saigon, but there were vendors and people selling everything from bottles of Coca-Cola to French bread. And then I was surprised again when we entered the perimeter of the 25th Infantry Division, because that was a city unto itself. There were buildings of all shapes and sizes. There was a large hospital, there was a PX, shopping. I could see roads that led to different units that were set up like neighborhoods. And there were construction crews of civilians and soldiers working together. And after a brief stop at the PX, I went to my unit. I was assigned to the 1/5 Mechanized Infantry. And I checked in, and they told me where to report to. I was assigned to Bravo Company, one of the platoons there. They told me my hut number, or they call it a hooch. I got to my new home, and I found that this was a crudely made wooden structure that had, the walls were actually canvas, and it had a tin roof, and the floor was made of plywood. And the beds were cots that were lined in 2 rows. Now, there was no one there. It was empty. And I saw the cot that was mine because it didn't have any bedding on it. I had my bedding that they gave me at the office. So I went to the Foot Locker, and I put all my belongings into the Foot Locker. And then I put my radio that I had just bought at the PX, a beautiful new radio. I put it on top of the Foot Locker. And then I went to listening to music. I started to fix my bed the best I could. Then I had to go to the bathroom, or actually it was a latrine. So I walked out to go to the latrine. I left the music playing. No one was there, so a few minutes later I'm coming back. I don't hear the radio, and I'm thinking, could the batteries have gone dead? I mean, they were brand new. Well, I got inside, and I found out why the music wasn't playing. My radio was gone. There was still no one there. I looked outside from one door, no one in sight. The other door, no one. But I had no radio. That was my first cut. Well, sometime the next day, I was greeted by several members of my platoon who had just come back from what they called a search and destroy mission. And I was soon to get familiar with those missions. And to be honest with you, there was a lot more searching than there was destroying. But occasionally there was destruction, because war is like a cancer that destroys and consumes. And whenever we got back from one of those search and destroy missions, it was like a homecoming celebration. There would be steaks on the grill, there would be corn on the cob, baked potato, soda, beer, cake, sometimes even ice cream. But one day we got back, and we got great news. We were so happy when we heard this. They had built a movie theater right in our unit. And not only that, but it came with a full-size popcorn machine. We couldn't stop talking about it. We ate quickly, and most of us headed to the theater. Now, this theater, again, was a big wooden structure. It had no walls. The seats were crudely made wooden benches that were in rows. There was a projectionist booth towards the end. There was like a counter for the popcorn machine, and the floor was just dirt. So I grabbed the biggest bag of popcorn with butter that I could. It was huge. And I held it to my chest. It was so warm. The aroma was so exquisite. I was like holding a baby. And I grabbed a can of Coke, and I went to the back, and I sat there. And since there were no walls, we had to wait until it was dark before the movie could start. So a few of us were sitting there, talking, waiting for the movie to start. And eventually it did start. Now, I can't tell you what movie it was, because I frankly don't remember. But one thing I can tell you is that for that brief moment in time, I was back at the Lowe's Paradise on Fordham Road in the Bronx. There was no war. I was home. I smelled that popcorn, and I was transported someplace else. And I'm sure that every soldier there was transported back to wherever they came from, to their hometowns. But sadly, we were soon brought back into reality when an explosion hit nearby. And then another and another. And then the smell of smoke, burning earth, and explosives. We were under a mortar attack. And everybody started to scramble and run for cover. And I didn't know what to do. I still was holding my popcorn. So I gently put the popcorn down. I put the can of Coke, which was still half full, next to the popcorn, and I ran in the direction of my hooch. As I was running, I passed by a hooch that had a plume of smoke rising from the roof like a giant ghost. And then, from its door, a soldier ran out. His clothes were all torn and shredded, and he was covered in blood. And I don't know how I did this, because at that time I weighed maybe 130 pounds. But I picked him up, and I began to run in the direction of the clinic. Now my heart was pounding like a drum, boom, boom, boom. Perspiration was running down my face like raindrops on a window. And I kept running and running, and soon I realized that his blood was also running down my body. I was covered in his blood too. And I ran into the clinic, and I got there, and I found other medics tending to other wounded soldiers. And we patched them up the best we could. Some of them needed morphine, and we did that. And then I volunteered to go with 2 others to bring them to the hospital by Jeep. And on the way there, we comforted them, and we told them that everything was going to be okay, and we tried to even tell them jokes. And we got to the hospital, we left them there, and we came back to our unit. And when we got back, my heart was still pounding like a drum. Boom, boom, boom. I was shaken from the events of the night, but I couldn't get that popcorn out of my mind. I really couldn't. So instead of going to my hooch, I returned to the theater. There was no one there. It was empty. But I could still smell the smoke. And I could smell the burning earth. And I could smell the explosive, the gunpowder. And I trembled a bit. And I wiped the sweat from my forehead. And I went to get my popcorn. But it wasn't there. The can of Coke wasn't there either. I looked under the bench, it wasn't there. I looked at other benches, it was gone. It was gone. That was my second cut. So I walked out, still covered in perspiration and blood, and I was trembling. And as I walked in the direction of my hooch, I couldn't help but wonder what the next cut was going to be. That's my story.